Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Garrett Reeves stood in his corner office on the 32nd floor, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a chessboard. At 42, he commanded respect in boardrooms and fear in back alleys, a duality few knew existed. His steel-gray eyes, scarred hands hidden beneath expensive Italian suits, and the slight limp from Kandahar told stories he never shared with his family. To the world, Garrett was a successful security consultant whose company, Ironclad Solutions, protected Fortune 500 executives and their families. What they didn't know was that his methods often ventured into gray areas that would make conventional security firms uncomfortable. His military background in Delta Force had taught him that sometimes protecting good people meant doing terrible things to bad ones. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Bridget. Running late again. Don't wait up. Hugs and kisses. Garrett stared at the message, his jaw tightening. 3 years ago, he would have believed it. 3 months ago, he might have questioned it. Today, he knew it was a lie. Bridget thought she was clever, but she'd forgotten she'd married a man trained to notice when people were lying, cheating, or planning something deadly. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 15 years protecting strangers from threats they never saw coming, while a threat had been growing in his own home. His assistant, Ruby, knocked and entered. "Mr. Reeves, your son's school called. Connor's been in another fight." Garrett sighed. Connor had been acting out for months, angry, withdrawn, getting into trouble. At 15, the boy was already showing signs of the Reeves temperament. Observant, protective, and utterly unforgiving when betrayed. What happened this time? Someone was talking about you and Mrs. Reeves. Connor didn't appreciate the comments. Garrett's blood chilled. If other people were talking, it meant Bridget's affair wasn't as discreet as she thought. In a small community like theirs, secrets had a way of becoming public entertainment. Cancel my afternoon. I'm picking him up. The drive to Connor's prep school gave Garrett time to think. Bridget had been different lately, distant, secretive, always on her phone. She'd started working out obsessively, buying expensive lingerie that never made it into their bedroom, and volunteering for charity events that seemed to require overnight trips. But Garrett hadn't survived 2 tours in Afghanistan by acting on suspicion alone. He needed proof, and he needed a plan. Connor was waiting outside the principal's office, his knuckles bruised, his uniform disheveled. The boy had inherited his father's build and his mother's cunning, a dangerous combination. "Ready to go?" Garrett asked. Connor nodded, not meeting his eyes. They drove in silence until Connor finally spoke. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "If someone betrayed you, someone you trusted completely, what would you do?" Garrett glanced at his son, seeing something dark in the boy's eyes that reminded him of himself at that age. "Depends on the betrayal." "What?" Connor stared out the window. "Just wondering." That night, Garrett found Connor in the garage, methodically cleaning his mountain bike chain with the same precision Garrett had once taught him to clean weapons. The boy worked with focused intensity, as if the repetitive motion could quiet whatever storm was building inside him. "Connor." His son looked up, and Garrett saw something that made his chest tighten. The boy knew something that was eating him alive. "Whatever you're carrying, son, you don't have to carry it alone." Connor's hands stilled on the chain. For a moment, he looked like he might speak. Then he shook his head and returned to his work. "I'm fine, Dad." But Garrett knew his son was anything but fine. And as he watched Connor work, a terrible understanding began to form. The boy's anger, his protectiveness, his questions about betrayal. Connor had discovered something. Something about Bridget. That night, as Bridget slipped into bed beside him, smelling of unfamiliar cologne masked by too much perfume, Garrett made a decision. He would find out what Connor knew, and then he would decide what to do about it. Because if there was one thing Delta Force had taught him, it was that the most dangerous enemies were the ones who slept in your own bed. Chapter 2. Sins of the Mother. Connor sat in his father's study at 2 a.m., staring at the photos spread across the mahogany desk. His hands shook as he picked up each image, His mother with a man he didn't recognize, kissing in restaurant parking lots, entering hotels, lying naked in unfamiliar bedrooms. 3 weeks ago, Connor had been looking for his mother's car keys to move her Mercedes out of the driveway when his basketball rolled under her car. Reaching for it, his fingers had found a small magnetic box attached to the undercarriage. Inside was a GPS tracker and a micro SD card. The tracker had led him to addresses across the city. The SD card contained hundreds of photos and videos, all automatically uploaded from cameras his father had installed months ago. Connor realized his father already knew. The study door opened silently. Garrett entered, unsurprised to find his son there. "How long have you known?" Connor asked without looking up. "For months." Garrett poured himself a whiskey and offered Connor a Coke. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks. Connor's voice cracked. "Why haven't you done anything?" Garrett sat across from his son, studying him carefully. "Because I'm not just planning to catch them, Connor. I'm planning to destroy them. And that takes time." Connor looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Your mother thinks she's having a simple affair with Trevor Walsh. She thinks she's clever, sneaking around, planning to divorce me and take half of everything I've built." Garrett's voice was calm, almost conversational. "What she doesn't realize is that Trevor isn't just some investment banker she met at the country club." Garrett pulled out a thick file and slid it across the desk. "Trevor Walsh, former Navy SEAL, dishonorably discharged for selling weapons to insurgents in Iraq. He spent 2 years in Leavenworth before being released on a technicality. He's been targeting wealthy wives for 5 years, convincing them to leave their husbands and wire him money from joint accounts." Connor's eyes widened as he flipped through the file. "Mom's his mark. One of them. He's got 3 other women on the hook right now." Garrett's smile was predatory. "But your mother doesn't know that. She thinks she's special. She thinks they're going to run away together to his beach house in Costa Rica." "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been hunting him for 18 months. One of my clients hired me after Trevor destroyed her family. By the time I was ready to move on him, I discovered he'd targeted Bridget." Garrett's jaw tightened. That made it personal. Connor processed this information. "So what's the plan?" "You're 15, Connor. You shouldn't be part of this." "I'm already part of this." Connor's voice hardened with determination that reminded Garrett painfully of himself. "She's my mother, and she's destroying our family. I want her to pay." Garrett studied his son for a long moment. The boy had already been forced to grow up too fast. Protecting him from the truth wouldn't change what had happened, but it might rob Connor of the closure he needed. "Trevor's planning something big," Garrett said finally. "Tomorrow night, they're going to try to kill me." Connor's blood ran cold. "What?" "They've been slowly poisoning my insulin. Not enough to kill me, just enough to make me sick and disoriented. Tomorrow, they're planning to stage a car accident. Make it look like I had a diabetic episode and crashed." Garrett showed Connor a small vial of clear liquid. "This was in my insulin pen. Industrial-grade antifreeze, almost undetectable." "Jesus, Dad, Trevor's done this before. Insurance money is easier than divorce settlements, and widows are more sympathetic than divorcees." Garrett's eyes turned arctic. "But they made one crucial mistake." "What?" "They assumed I wouldn't know. They assumed I was just another Mark, another trusting husband who would never see it coming." Garrett's smile was terrifying. "They have no idea who they're trying to kill." Connor felt something shift inside him, a cold, calculating anger that felt inherited. "What do you need me to do?" The next morning, Bridget hummed while making breakfast, her phone buzzing constantly with texts she thought Garrett couldn't see. She'd been careful to delete them, but she didn't know about the sophisticated surveillance software Garrett had installed on her phone months ago. "I might be late tonight," she said, kissing Garrett's cheek. "Charity committee meeting." "Of course," Garrett replied, injecting just the right amount of resigned acceptance into his voice. "Connor and I will probably grab dinner and catch a movie." "Sound perfect." Bridget's smile was bright and false. "You two have fun." As she left, Garrett caught Connor's eye. Phase 1 was about to begin. Chapter 3, The Trap Springs. The restaurant parking lot was nearly empty at 8 p.m. when Garrett and Connor finished their dinner. They walked toward Garrett's black BMW, Connor's nervous energy barely contained. "Remember," Garrett said quietly, Everything depends on timing. Connor nodded, his hand hovering over his phone. They'd rehearsed this moment for hours, but knowing his mother was planning to murder his father made his stomach churn with acid. As they approached the car, Connor suddenly grabbed his father's arm. "Dad, let's not take the car. Let's take a taxi." Garrett frowned, playing his part perfectly. "Why?" Connor looked serious, his eyes scanning the parking lot with paranoid intensity. "You'll see, just get out, please." The urgency in his son's voice was convincing, partly because the boy's fear was real. Even knowing this was a trap, Connor couldn't shake the terror that something might go wrong. Feeling uneasy, Garrett listened to his son and stepped away from the BMW. They walked to the restaurant's entrance, positioning themselves behind a concrete pillar with a clear view of the parking lot. Minutes later, two figures emerged from the shadows between parked cars. Bridget, wearing dark clothing and latex gloves, approached the driver's side while Trevor moved to the passenger side. They worked quickly and efficiently, Trevor attaching something to the brake lines while Bridget connected a device to the car's onboard computer system. Garrett's blood turned to ice, not from surprise, but from the calculated coldness of watching his wife attempt to orchestrate his murder. Connor made a small sound beside him, and Garrett pulled out his phone. 911, this is Garrett Reeves. I'm at Romano's restaurant on 5th Street, and I'm watching two people sabotage my vehicle. I need police and bomb squad immediately. Connor filmed everything with his phone while Garrett continued talking to the dispatcher, providing detailed descriptions and real-time updates. Trevor's device was more sophisticated than Garrett had expected. Not just brake tampering, but a complete system override that would allow remote control of the vehicle. "They're finishing up," Garrett reported. "The woman is... Jesus Christ, that's my wife." His acting was flawless, conveying exactly the right amount of shock and betrayal. Connor had to admire his father's ability to sound devastated while his eyes remained coldly calculating. Trevor and Bridget slipped away into the darkness just as police sirens became audible in the distance. They'd timed their escape perfectly, but they had no idea they'd been recorded from multiple angles by cameras Garrett had positioned around the parking lot weeks ago. The next hour was a carefully orchestrated performance. Police found the brake tampering, the computer override device, and traces of explosive residue that Trevor had planted to ensure the car would catch fire after the crash. The bomb squad confirmed that Garrett and Connor would have died within minutes of starting the vehicle. Detective Angela Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, took Garrett's statement while Connor sat nearby, still shaking with adrenaline. "Mr. Reeves, do you have any idea who might want to hurt you?" Garrett hesitated convincingly. "I run a security company. We deal with some unsavory characters. But this level of sophistication..." He paused, as if a terrible thought was occurring to him. "Detective, I need to ask you something, and I hope I'm wrong." "Go ahead." "My wife has been acting strangely lately. Staying out late, being secretive. And my son..." He looked at Connor. "Tell her what you told me." Connor played his part perfectly. "I think Mom's having an affair. I've seen her with someone, but I wasn't sure if I should say anything." Detective Morrison's expression sharpened. "Do you have any evidence of this affair?" Garrett reluctantly handed over a tablet containing a carefully curated selection of photos and videos, enough to establish Bridget's infidelity and Trevor's identity, but not enough to reveal the full extent of his surveillance operation. "We'll need to bring your wife in for questioning," Morrison said after reviewing the evidence. "And we'll put out a bolo for this Trevor Walsh character." As the police finished their investigation, Garrett allowed himself a small smile. Bridget and Trevor thought they were hunting him, but they'd walked directly into his trap. They'd committed attempted murder in front of multiple cameras, left physical evidence, and provided Garrett with the perfect justification for everything that was about to happen. Connor looked up at his father as they waited for their ride home. "What happens now?" "Now." Garrett's smile turned predatory. "Now, they learn what happens when you try to kill a Reeves." But this was only the beginning. The legal system would give Bridget and Trevor a few years in prison at most. Garrett had something much more permanent in mind. As they drove home in a police cruiser, Garrett's phone buzzed with a panicked text from Bridget. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Is everything okay?" He showed the message to Connor, who shook his head in disgust. Even now, she was still lying, still playing the concerned wife while hiding the fact that she just tried to murder them both. Should we respond? Connor asked. Not yet, Garrett replied. Let her panic. Fear makes people stupid, and I need her to make a few more mistakes before this is over. Because while Bridget and Trevor had failed to kill him tonight, Garrett Reeves was just getting started. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Bridget paced their bedroom at 3 a.m., her phone clutched in her trembling hands. 12 missed calls to Garrett, 15 texts, and no response. Trevor had assured her the plan was foolproof. A simple car accident, diabetic complications, no questions asked. Her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Mrs. Reeves? This is Detective Morrison with Metro Police. I need you to come down to the station immediately. What's wrong? Is my husband? Your husband is fine, ma'am. But we need to discuss an incident that occurred tonight involving your vehicle and an attempt on your husband's life. The phone slipped from Bridget's hand. They knew. Somehow impossibly they knew. At the police station, Bridget sat across from Detective Morrison, her lawyer David Klein beside her. On the table were photos, clear, high-definition images of her and Trevor sabotaging Garrett's car. Mrs. Reeves, can you explain why you were in the Romano's parking lot tonight, tampering with your husband's vehicle? I don't know what you're talking about. Morrison slid another photo across the table. This is you connecting a device to your husband's onboard computer. The device was designed to override his braking and steering systems remotely. Bridget's face went white. That's impossible. I was at home all evening. We have video footage from multiple angles, ma'am. We also have your phone's GPS data showing you were at that location from 7:45 to 8:20 p.m. Klein leaned forward. Detective, my client isn't saying another word until we review all the evidence. That's your right. But you should know, we've also arrested Trevor Walsh. He's already talking. The lie hit Bridget like a physical blow. Trevor would never betray her. They were in love. They had plans. But as the interrogation continued, doubt began to creep in. The police knew too much. They had too much evidence. And where was Trevor now? Meanwhile, Garrett stood in his basement workshop, methodically cleaning his pistol. The police had done their job perfectly, but Garrett wasn't relying on the justice system to deliver satisfaction. Connor found him there at dawn, still awake, still planning. Dad, the news is saying Mom and Trevor are both in custody. Good. Garrett's voice was emotionless. That gives us time to prepare the next phase. What next phase? Garrett looked up from his weapon. The courts will give them 15 to 20 years, maybe less with good behavior. That's not justice, Connor. That's not enough. Connor felt a chill run down his spine. What are you planning? Your mother chose her side when she decided to kill me. Trevor chose his when he decided to target my family. Garrett's eyes were cold as winter steel. I'm going to destroy them both, and everyone who helped them. Over the next few days, as media coverage of the Black Widow plot dominated local news, Garrett began implementing a plan he'd been developing for months. He'd known this day would come, and he'd prepared accordingly. The first target was Trevor's operation. Garrett had identified the other 3 women Trevor was manipulating, wealthy, lonely wives who thought they'd found true love. Using his security company's resources, Garrett began feeding information to their husbands, providing evidence of Trevor's criminal history and his plans to rob them blind. Within a week, Trevor's entire network collapsed. His victims' husbands, armed with Garrett's evidence, moved to protect their assets and their families. Trevor's offshore accounts, his fake businesses, his escape routes, everything was systematically exposed and destroyed. But that was just the beginning. Bridget's bail hearing became a media circus. Her family hired the best criminal defense attorney money could buy, but they hadn't counted on Garrett's connections in the legal community. Every lawyer they approached found their caseloads mysteriously full. Every expert witness they tried to hire suddenly became unavailable. Connor watched his father work with a combination of awe and fear. Garrett moved through the shadows of legitimate society like a shark through dark water, using favors owed, secrets collected, and fear carefully cultivated to bend the world to his will. How do you know all these people? Connor asked one evening as Garrett finished a phone call that had apparently just cost Bridget's defense team their forensic expert. 15 years in the security business teaches you things, Garrett replied. Everyone has secrets, Connor. Everyone has something they'd rather keep hidden. The trick is knowing which secrets to collect and when to use them. But Garrett's real masterpiece was more personal. While Bridget sat in county jail, convinced Trevor would rescue her, she had no idea that Trevor was receiving daily visits from a fellow inmate who worked for Garrett. Every conversation was recorded. Every plan was reported. Every moment of Trevor's desperation was cataloged for future use. By the end of the first week, Trevor had revealed everything: his real name, his criminal history, his other victims, and most importantly, his backup plans for escaping prosecution. He'd also revealed something else. Bridget hadn't been his only target in the family. Trevor had been planning to kill Connor too, making it look like the boy had discovered the affair and been eliminated to keep him quiet. When Garrett learned this, something cold and final settled in his chest. Trevor wasn't just a predator who'd targeted his wife. He'd planned to murder Connor. That changed everything. That night, Garrett sat Connor down for a conversation that would define the rest of both their lives. Son, I need you to understand something. What your mother and Trevor tried to do, what they planned to do to you, that can't be forgiven. Ever. Connor nodded, his jaw set with the same implacable determination his father wore. I want you to make me a promise, Garrett continued. Promise me that no matter what happens next, no matter what you see or hear, you'll remember that they chose this path. They chose to try to destroy our family. I promise, Dad. Good. Garrett's smile was terrible and final. Because tomorrow, we're going to show them what happens when you betray a Reeves. The legal system had been just the opening move. Now the real game began. Chapter 5, Blood Money. Trevor Walsh sat in his county jail cell, staring at the letter that had been slipped under his meal tray. The writing was precise, military neat, and it made his blood run cold. Mr. Walsh, by now you've realized that your situation is more complicated than you anticipated. I know about Sarajevo. I know about the arms dealing. I know about Sarachun. You have 48 hours to decide. Cooperate with me, or spend the rest of your very short life looking over your shoulder. Choose wisely. Gr. Trevor's hands shook as he reread the letter. Sarachun had been a loose end from his military days, a CIA asset he'd sold out to insurgents for $50,000. She died screaming in a Baghdad basement, and Trevor had thought that secret was buried with her. Apparently, Garrett Reeves had other ideas. Meanwhile, across town, Bridget sat in her own cell, receiving a visitor she hadn't expected. Connor approached the reinforced glass partition, his expression unreadable. Mom. Connor, sweetheart, thank God. I've been so worried. This is all a terrible mistake. No, it's not. Connor's voice was calm, almost adult. I know what you did. I saw you tamper with Dad's car. Bridget's face crumpled. Honey, you don't understand. Your father isn't who you think he is. He's dangerous. He's what, Mom? A man who trusted his wife not to try to murder him. The accusation hung in the air between them. Bridget reached toward the glass, tears streaming down her face. Connor, please. I love you. I would never hurt you. But you would hurt Dad. And Trevor was planning to kill me too. Bridget's face went white. What are you talking about? Connor pulled out a tablet and showed her surveillance footage from one of Trevor's meetings with another criminal associate. On the video, Trevor was clearly explaining how he planned to eliminate the kid after the husband was dead, making it look like a home invasion gone wrong. He was going to murder me, Mom, and you gave him the keys to our house. The truth hit Bridget like a physical blow. She trusted Trevor completely, believed every lie he'd told her about their future together. She'd never questioned why he needed so much information about Connor's schedule, about the family's routines. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear to God, I didn't know. But you didn't care enough to find out. Connor's voice was ice cold. You were so busy planning to kill Dad that you never bothered to protect me. As Connor left the jail, Bridget collapsed on her cot, finally understanding the full scope of her betrayal. She'd not only tried to murder her husband, she'd unknowingly signed her son's death warrant. That night, Garrett received a call from Trevor's cell. I'll cooperate, Trevor said without preamble. What do you want? Everything, Garrett replied. Every name, every account, every detail of every operation you've run in the last 5 years. And I want information about who else knew about your plan to target my family. I worked alone. Bullshit. Someone gave you inside information about my routines, my security, my medical condition. Someone helped you identify my wife as a target. Garrett's voice was deadly quiet. I want names, Trevor. All of them. Over the next several days, Trevor provided a detailed confession that went far beyond the attempted murder. He revealed a network of corruption that included a nurse at Garrett's doctor's office who'd provided medical information, a country club employee who'd been passing along gossip about wealthy members' marriages, and a private investigator who'd been conducting surveillance on potential marks. But the most damaging revelation was about Bridget herself. She hadn't been the innocent victim of a master manipulator. She'd been an active participant in identifying and planning Garrett's murder. The recorded phone calls Trevor provided showed Bridget suggesting the insulin tampering, researching the best locations for staged accidents, and even scouting backup murder methods in case the car crash failed. She'd wanted Garrett dead, and she'd been willing to help plan his murder down to the smallest detail. Connor listened to the recordings in his father's study, his face growing harder with each revealed betrayal. She really hated him, Connor said finally. She hated what I represented, Garrett corrected. Security, stability, responsibility. She wanted freedom, excitement, danger. Trevor offered her all of that. And now, they're both going to learn that actions have consequences. The final piece of Garrett's plan began with a simple phone call to Trevor's former commanding officer, a general who'd been looking for Trevor since his disappearance 3 years earlier. It turned out Trevor had stolen more than just weapons in Iraq. He'd also made off with $2 million in reconstruction funds and the classified locations of several CIA safe houses. The military wanted Trevor back. Badly. Within hours of Garrett's call, federal marshals arrived at the county jail with transfer orders. Trevor was about to face a military tribunal for treason, theft, and the murder of Sarah Chun and 6 other CIA assets. The last thing Trevor saw before being dragged away was Garrett standing in the jail's parking lot, watching with cold satisfaction as justice finally caught up with him. Bridget's situation deteriorated just as quickly. The evidence Trevor had provided implicated her in conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and accessory to theft. Her bail was revoked, her assets were frozen, and her high-powered legal team suddenly found themselves facing federal prosecutors with unlimited resources and an airtight case. But Garrett wasn't finished. Not even close. Because while the law would handle their crimes, Garrett Reeves was about to deliver something far more personal. The complete destruction of everything they'd ever cared about, everyone they'd ever loved, and every dream they'd ever held. The game was entering its final phase, and Garrett Reeves had never lost a game that mattered. Chapter 6. The Sins of the Father. 3 months after the arrests, Garrett sat in his lawyer's office reviewing the divorce papers with surgical precision. Every asset, every account, every piece of property was being transferred to trust that Bridget could never touch, even if she somehow avoided conviction. "This is extremely thorough," his attorney Marcus Hoffman said, reviewing the documents. "She'll have no legal claim to anything acquired during the marriage." Good. Garrett's voice was flat. "What about her family? That's where things get interesting." Marcus pulled out another file. "Your friend in the FBI was very helpful. Bridget's brother Dale has been running a money laundering operation through his construction company. Her sister Patricia has been filing fraudulent disability claims for years. And her father," Marcus paused dramatically, "he's been evading taxes on offshore gambling winnings to the tune of $3 million. Garrett smiled coldly. Bridget's family had always looked down on him, treating him like hired help despite his success. They'd seen him as beneath their precious daughter, a rough soldier who'd gotten lucky in business. Soon they'd understand exactly who they'd been dealing with. How long before the indictments come down? 2 weeks. The IRS moves fast when they smell blood in the water." Connor walked into the office, his school uniform replaced by dark clothing that made him look older, harder. At 15, he'd already developed the cold analytical mind that ran in the Reeves bloodline. "Dad, we have a problem." Garrett looked up sharply. What kind of problem? Mom's been making phone calls from jail. She's trying to convince people that you're the real criminal, that you framed her and Trevor. Who's she calling? Uncle Dale, Aunt Patricia, some reporter from Channel 7. Connor's expression was grim. She's also been telling people that you abused her, that she was scared for her life. Garrett felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Even now, facing life in prison, Bridget was still lying, still manipulating, still trying to destroy him. She's not going to stop, Connor said quietly. Even if she goes to prison, she'll keep trying to hurt us. I know. Garrett's voice was barely above a whisper, which is why we're going to end this permanently. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Gentlemen, I think I'll step out for some coffee. After the lawyer left, Garrett turned to his son. Connor, what I'm about to tell you can never leave this room. Do you understand? Yes, sir. There are problems that the legal system can't solve. There are threats that prison can't neutralize. Garrett's eyes were like chips of ice. Your mother has made it clear that she'll never stop trying to destroy us. That makes her a permanent threat to our family. Connor nodded slowly. What are you going to do? Well, I should have done months ago. Garrett pulled out a secure phone, one of several he kept for off-the-books business. I'm going to call in some favors. The first call went to Luis Ramirez, a former Army Ranger who now ran a private military company specializing in problem resolution for corporate clients. The second went to Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychiatrist who'd worked with Garrett on several high-security cases involving dangerous criminals. By evening, the framework was in place. Bridget would suffer a series of mental breakdowns in prison, brought on by carefully administered drugs that would leave no trace in her system. She'd become paranoid, delusional, eventually completely divorced from reality. Trevor, meanwhile, would face a different fate. Military prison was notoriously dangerous for traitors, and accidents happened all the time. A slip in a shower, a fall down some stairs, a fight with the wrong inmates. Any number of things could happen to a man who betrayed his country and gotten fellow soldiers killed. Is this justice, Dad? Connor asked as Garrett finished his final phone call. No, son. This is survival. Garrett's expression was carved from stone. They tried to kill us both. They would have succeeded if we'd been less careful, less prepared. Now, they're going to pay the price for underestimating a Reeves. But even as Garrett set his final plan in motion, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line he'd never crossed before. In the military, enemies were clearly defined. In business, threats were obvious. But this was his wife, Connor's mother, the woman he'd once loved enough to build a life with. That night, as Connor slept, Garrett stood in his study looking at their wedding photo. Bridget had been beautiful that day, radiant with happiness and hope for their future together. Where had that woman gone? When had love turned to hate so complete that she'd try to murder him? His phone buzzed with a text from Luis. Package will be delivered as discussed. ETA, 72 hours. Garrett stared at the message for a long time, his finger hovering over the delete button. Once he replied, there would be no going back. Bridget would die in prison, and it would look like a complete mental breakdown followed by suicide. Trevor would die even sooner, the victim of a prison riot that would leave no witnesses and no questions. But as Garrett hesitated, another message arrived, this one from an unknown number. Stop this now, or I'll tell the FBI everything. B. Somehow, impossibly, Bridget had gotten word of his plan. She was threatening him, even now, even for behind bars. Garrett's moment of doubt evaporated like morning frost. He typed a single word in response to Luis, confirmed. Then he turned off the phone and went to check on Connor. His son was sleeping peacefully, safe in his own bed, protected by a father who would do anything to keep him that way. In 72 hours, Bridget and Trevor would be dead, and the threat to his family would be eliminated forever. Garrett Reeves had never been a man who forgave or forgot, and he was about to remind the world why that was a very dangerous thing to overlook. Chapter 7. The Final Gambit. Trevor Walsh's body was found in the exercise yard of Fort Leavenworth at 6:15 a.m., killed by a makeshift blade that had punctured his carotid artery. The official report blamed a conflict with other inmates over a gambling debt. No witnesses came forward. No one asked too many questions. Garrett received the news while having breakfast with Connor, the secure phone buzzing once with a simple message. Package delivered. Dad. Connor looked up from his eggs. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, son. Garrett deleted the message and returned to his coffee. Just business. Across town, in the county jail's medical wing, Bridget sat in a padded cell, staring at the walls with eyes that no longer focused properly. The psychiatric drugs Dr. Foster had arranged to have added to her food had done their work efficiently. Bridget's grip on reality had deteriorated so rapidly that even hardened corrections officers were disturbed by her condition. She spent her days talking to invisible people, claiming that Garrett was watching her through the walls, insisting that Connor was in danger from shadowy government agents. The official diagnosis was severe paranoid schizophrenia brought on by the stress of her criminal prosecution. Her family's attempts to visit were denied on medical grounds. Her lawyer's efforts to communicate with her were hampered by her inability to form coherent sentences for more than a few minutes at a time. To the outside world, Bridget Reeves had suffered a complete mental breakdown, brought on by guilt over her crimes and the realization that she'd lost everything she'd ever cared about. But late at night, in her few moments of clarity, Bridget knew the truth. Garrett was destroying her methodically, clinically, using resources and connections she'd never imagined he possessed. She tried to tell the doctors, tried to warn the guards, but her words came out as paranoid ramblings that only reinforced their diagnosis. The final blow came when Connor visited her for the last time. He sat across from her in the visiting room, watching as she struggled to maintain focus long enough to speak. "Connor," she whispered, gripping the table with white knuckles. "You have to listen to me. Your father, he's not who you think he is. He's dangerous. He's what, Mom?" Connor's voice was calm, almost gentle. A man who protected his family from people trying to kill them? No, you don't understand. He's done things. Terrible things. He's killed people. Connor leaned forward, his eyes cold as Arctic ice. Good. The single word hit Bridget like a physical blow. She stared at her son, seeing Garrett's ruthlessness reflected in the boy's face. "Connor, please. I'm still your mother." "No," Connor said quietly. "You were my mother. But that woman died the night you tried to murder my father." He stood to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mom? Trevor's dead. Dad wanted you to know." Bridget's scream of anguish echoed through the visiting room as Connor walked away without looking back. That night, as Bridget sobbed in her cell, she finally understood the full scope of Garrett's revenge. He hadn't just destroyed her life. He'd turned her own son against her. He'd taken everything she'd ever loved and twisted it into a weapon aimed at her heart. And he wasn't finished. The next morning brought news that Bridget's entire family had been arrested in coordinated federal raids. Her brother Dale was charged with money laundering and racketeering. Her sister Patricia faced federal fraud charges. Her elderly father was being audited by the IRS for tax evasion and would likely spend his remaining years in federal prison. The media, fed carefully leaked information by Garrett's contacts, painted the whole family as a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. Bridget's affair and murder plot were just the latest in a long line of illegal activities. Her mother, the only family member who wasn't facing charges, suffered a massive stroke when FBI agents raided her home. She died 3 days later without regaining consciousness. Bridget learned about her mother's death from a news report playing in the common area. She collapsed, screaming, clawing at her own face until guards restrained her and added another note to her psychiatric file. Patient shows increasing signs of self-harm. Recommend maximum security protocols. Meanwhile, Garrett stood in his study, reading police reports and medical evaluations with clinical detachment. Every piece of his plan had fallen into place with mathematical precision. Trevor was dead. Bridget was destroyed mentally and would likely spend the rest of her life in psychiatric care. Her family was in ruins. Connor found him there, standing over the evidence of their complete victory. "Is it over?" the boy asked. "Almost." Garrett turned to face his son. "There's just one more thing to take care of." "What's that?" Garrett pulled out a final file, this one containing information about Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the physician who'd been treating Garrett's diabetes. She'd been the one who'd provided Trevor with information about Garrett's medical condition, enabling them to poison his insulin with antifreeze. Dr. Mitchell thought she was just helping a concerned friend gather medical information, Garrett said. She had no idea she was enabling an attempted murder. But she violated doctor-patient confidentiality, and that kind of betrayal can't go unpunished. Connor frowned. What are you going to do to her? Nothing permanent, but she's going to lose her medical license, her practice, and her reputation. By the time I'm finished, she'll never work in medicine again. Dad, Connor hesitated. When does it stop? Garrett looked at his son sharply. What do you mean? The revenge, the destruction. When do we stop punishing people? For a moment, Garrett felt something like doubt flicker in his chest. But then he remembered the sound of Bridget and Trevor tampering with his car, remembered the antifreeze they'd put in his insulin, remembered Trevor's plan to murder Connor. It stops when everyone who betrayed us has paid the price, Garrett said finally. It stops when the world understands that you don't cross a Reeves family and walk away. Connor nodded slowly, but something in his expression troubled Garrett. The boy was learning lessons about power and revenge, but he was also learning about the cost of such knowledge. That night, as Garrett made his final phone calls to destroy Dr. Mitchell's career, he wondered if he was creating a monster in his own son. But then he reminded himself that Connor needed to be strong, needed to be prepared for a world where enemies could come from anywhere, even from inside your own family. The world was a dangerous place, and mercy was a luxury the Reeves family could no longer afford. Chapter 8. Blood and Ashes. 6 months later, Garrett stood in the cemetery where they'd buried Bridget's mother, watching workers lower another casket into the frozen ground. Bridget had died in her sleep 3 days earlier, her heart finally giving out after months of psychiatric medication and psychological torture. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest brought on by severe depression and anxiety. Only 5 people attended the funeral: Garrett, Connor, 2 corrections officers who'd been assigned to escort the body, and a priest who'd never met the deceased. Connor stood beside his father, wearing a black suit that made him look older than his 16 years. The boy hadn't spoken since learning of his mother's death, hadn't shown any emotion beyond a slight tightening around his eyes. How do you feel? Garrett asked quietly. Empty, Connor replied. I thought I'd feel something. Satisfaction, sadness, anger. But there's nothing. Garrett understood. Revenge was supposed to provide closure, but sometimes it just left you hollow. They'd won completely, destroyed their enemies utterly, but victory felt strangely anticlimactic. That's normal, Garrett said. The first time is always difficult. Connor looked at his father sharply. The first time? You think your mother and Trevor were the first people who tried to destroy me? The first enemies I've had to eliminate. Garrett's voice was matter of fact. Son, I've been fighting wars since before you were born. Some of them were official, with uniforms and flags and medals. Others were private, personal, necessary. The revelation hung between them, like smoke from a funeral pyre. Connor suddenly understood that his father wasn't just a successful businessman with military training. He was something far more dangerous, a predator who'd learned to hunt in corporate boardrooms and suburban neighborhoods. How many? Connor asked. Does it matter? It matters to me. Garrett studied his son's face, seeing something that reminded him of himself at that age. A hunger for truth, no matter how dark. 17, Garrett said finally. Over 25 years. Some were enemy combatants in Afghanistan. Others were threats to clients I was protecting. A few were personal. Connor processed this information with the same cold, analytical mind he'd inherited from his father. Did they all deserve it? They all made the choice to threaten something I was protecting, whether they deserved it. Garrett shrugged. That's a question for philosophers. I'm a soldier. They drove home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The house felt different now, larger, emptier, free of the poisonous presence that had infected it for so long, but also somehow diminished, as if the very act of winning had cost them something essential. That evening, as they sat in the study reviewing documents from Bridget's estate, Connor made a decision that would change everything. I want to know, he said suddenly. Know what? Everything. how you do what you do, who you really are, where our family really is. Garrett set down his whiskey and studied his son carefully. Why? Because I'm a Reeves. Because this is my inheritance, isn't it? Not just the money and the business, but this. Connor gestured to the files containing evidence of their destroyed enemies. This is what we are. Connor, you're 16. You should be worried about homework and girls and college applications. I stopped being a normal 16-year-old the night Mom tried to kill us both. Connor's voice was steady, resolute. You've already taught me that the world is full of predators, that family can betray you, that mercy is weakness. Now, teach me how to fight back. Garrett felt something twist in his chest, pride mixed with sorrow, satisfaction tinged with regret. He'd wanted to protect Connor's innocence, but that innocence had died along with Bridget. All right, Garrett said finally, but understand this. Once you start down this path, there's no going back. Once you learn what I'm going to teach you, you'll never be able to pretend the world is safe again. I don't want to pretend anymore. Over the next several hours, Garrett began Connor's real education. He showed him the hidden room behind the study's bookshelf, filled with weapons, surveillance equipment, and files on dozens of potential threats. He explained the network of contacts he'd built over 2 decades. Soldiers, spies, criminals, politicians, all bound to him by favors owed or secrets shared. He taught Connor about leverage, about how information was more valuable than money, about how fear was more reliable than loyalty. He showed him how to identify threats before they materialized, how to gather intelligence without being detected, how to destroy an enemy so completely that even their allies would abandon them. This is the real family business, Garrett explained as Connor examined an encrypted hard drive containing blackmail material on 3 senators and a federal judge. Security consulting is just the cover. What we really do is protect ourselves and our interests by any means necessary. Connor absorbed every lesson with the intensity of a born predator learning to hunt. He asked sharp questions, identified weaknesses in theoretical scenarios, suggested improvements to Garrett's methods. By dawn, father and son had reached an understanding. Connor would finish high school, would go to college, would learn to present a normal face to the world. But underneath that facade, he would be preparing to inherit Garrett's true legacy, the knowledge and connections and ruthless pragmatism necessary to survive in a world where your own family might try to kill you. One more thing, Garrett said as they finished. We never discuss your mother again. She made her choice. She paid the price. And now she's gone. We don't mourn enemies. Connor nodded. What about forgiveness? What about it? Do we ever forgive anyone? Ever? Garrett's smile was cold and final. Forgiveness is for people who can afford to be betrayed twice. We're not those people. As the sun rose over their kingdom of secrets and silent graves, Garrett Reeves and his son stood together, bound by blood and shared knowledge of what it took to survive when mercy was weakness and trust was a luxury they could never afford. The game was over. They had won. But in the shadows of their victory, new enemies were already stirring, drawn by the scent of power and the promise of revenge against the family that never forgave and never forgot. The next war was already beginning. Chapter 9, Legacy of Ice. 2 years later, Connor Reeves sat in his freshman dorm at Harvard, reading a letter that had been slipped under his door. The paper was expensive, the handwriting elegant, and the message was signed with a name that made his blood run cold. Connor, my name is Victoria Walsh. Trevor was my brother. I know what your father did to him. I know what he did to your mother. I know what he's been teaching you. This isn't over. Consider this your only warning. Connor destroyed the letter immediately, but not before memorizing every detail. Then he called his father using one of the encrypted phones Garrett had given him for emergencies. We have a problem, Connor said without preamble. What kind of problem? Trevor had a sister, Victoria Walsh. She knows about us. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Garrett's voice, cold and calculating. Tell me everything. Connor relayed the contents of the letter while simultaneously accessing the university's security system through a backdoor Garrett had installed months earlier. Victoria Walsh appeared on multiple cameras around campus. A woman in her 30s, attractive, well-dressed, moving with the confident grace of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. She's been watching me, Connor realized. Probably since Mom died. Any indication she's working with others? Unknown. But Dad, she found me at Harvard. That takes resources, connections, intelligence capabilities. Or luck, Garrett said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it was luck at all. That evening, Connor was studying in the library when Victoria Walsh approached his table. Up close, she was beautiful in the same predatory way Trevor had been handsome, all sharp angles and cold intelligence. "Connor Reeves," she said, sitting down uninvited. "You look just like your father." "Ms. Walsh." Connor didn't look up from his textbook. "I assume you didn't come here to discuss genetics." "I came to give you a choice." Victoria's voice was soft, reasonable. "Walk away from your father's business. Live a normal life. Go to college, get married, have children, die peacefully in your sleep. And if I refuse, then you'll join your father in hell." Connor finally looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "My father taught me something about threats, Ms. Walsh. Never make one unless you're prepared to follow through immediately." "Oh, I'm prepared." Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "You see, Connor, while your father was busy destroying my brother and your mother, I was busy learning everything there is to know about Garrett Reeves. His businesses, his contacts, his methods, his weaknesses." She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen were photos of Garrett meeting with various criminals and military contractors, documents proving his involvement in arms dealing and political assassination, recorded conversations discussing bribes and blackmail. "I have enough evidence to put your father away from multiple life sentences," Victoria continued. "I also have the names and locations of 17 families who lost loved ones to Garrett's operations. They're very interested in meeting you both." Connor's expression didn't change, but his mind was racing. This woman had done in 2 years what most intelligence agencies couldn't do in a decade. She'd penetrated Garrett's security and gathered actionable intelligence on his operations. "What do you want?" Connor asked. "Justice for Trevor, justice for your mother, and justice for every life your father has destroyed." Victoria leaned forward. "I want Garrett Reeves to suffer the way his victims suffered. I want him to lose everything he cares about, the way Trevor lost everything. And me, you're a child who was raised by a monster. I'm willing to give you a chance to escape that legacy." Her voice softened slightly. "But only one chance, Connor. Choose wisely." After Victoria left, Connor sat alone in the library for hours, processing what he'd learned. His father had made enemies, serious, dangerous, well-connected enemies who were now coming for revenge. The empire Garrett had built through violence and intimidation was about to face its greatest challenge. Connor could warn his father, could help him prepare for the coming war. Or he could walk away, disappear into the normal world Victoria Walsh was offering him. For the first time in 2 years, Connor Reeves faced a choice that wasn't predetermined by loyalty or revenge or family obligation. He picked up his phone and dialed Garrett's number. "Dad, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "Victoria Walsh has everything. Names, dates, evidence. She's got 17 families lined up for revenge, and enough proof to put you away forever." Silence. "Then, are you thinking of running, son?" Connor closed his eyes, feeling the weight of inherited sin pressing down on him like a mountain. "No, Dad. I'm thinking it's time to finish what they started. Good boy. Come home. We have work to do." As Connor packed his bags, leaving Harvard and the possibility of a normal life behind forever, he understood that this was what it meant to be a Reeves. You didn't get to choose your battles or your enemies. You didn't get to forgive or forget or walk away from the blood on your hands. You inherited the sins of your fathers, and you paid for them with interest until the day you died. But first, you made sure your enemies paid an even steeper price. Connor Reeves was going home to war, carrying on a family tradition of ruthless pragmatism and unforgiving revenge. His childhood was over, his innocence was dead, and his education in the family business was about to begin in earnest. Some legacies were built on love and hope and shared dreams. The Reeves legacy was built on blood and ashes and the absolute certainty that mercy was a luxury they could never afford. The sins of the father had become the sins of the son, and the cycle would continue until either they destroyed their enemies completely or their enemies destroyed them. Connor had made his choice. Now he would live with the consequences, just as Garrett had, just as every Reeves before them had done. Because in the end, family wasn't about forgiveness or redemption or second chances. Family was about standing together when the world came for your throat and making sure you were the last ones left standing when the blood finally stopped flowing. The war was just beginning, and Connor Reeves was ready to fight it. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.